Sorry, Kevin, I caught you mid-sip there. Welcome into Hack Radio, everybody. My name is Brian Hattab. I was the host of the similar titled show, Hack Radio, at the University of South Florida for, God, it feels like 50 years, and it also feels like it was 50 years ago. That is Kevin Erlinson. He was the sports director at said radio station when, I guess, the radio station saw its demise.
Rest in peace. Never forget.
Or so we think. Anyway, that radio station was called Bulls Radio. Now it's a podcast service called Bulls Media. But
we'll see. Jury's out.
I saw a tweet saying that their office was under construction, so jury's out on what that means too. But Hack Radio was a sports talk show on that fine radio station. It fluctuated in terms of everything, really, in terms of hours, days of the week, and whether or not the show was particularly good or not. So with that in mind, I've been thinking about restarting Hack Radio for quite some time here as we sit here in the pandemic. Yes, the pandemic is still going on. All you news articles trying to write about how people were living during the pandemic, you're using the wrong tense, but that's a story for topic for another show, topic for maybe later in the show. But the ultimate point is I've been thinking about how can we relaunch this show to not only adapt to the fact that I'm not at USF anymore, nor are any of the revolving door of co-hosts, rotating door, whatever the nice term is you want to use. Nobody is still at USF, nor is that live radio station still a live radio station. So there's a lot that's changed, but I've been wanting to revive it for a while. I did a one-off audio-only sort of tease episode back in August. The topic of that was when the NBA players, not boycotted would be the wrong word, but it was the day
Thinking of leaving during the middle of the
yeah. It was that day, so I used that topic. You want to look at a calendar that will tell you when that one-off was, and I try to use it as a sort of like, sample reel to try to get some new blood in here. And I sent it to one person, never heard back, and I got discouraged from there because all my life I've always feared rejection, and the worst thing other than rejection is just not hearing anything back. So if at first you don't succeed, quit. Well, here we are in November, and I'm just bored out of my fucking mind. So may as well revive the show, not with new blood right off the bat, but with blood, and that blood takes the shape of
it's flowing in there
over there. Hey, Icelandic blood over there to my left.
Right, I got the flag in the background. We're ready to go.
I've got a scarf in my background. I had to rearrange a lot of things in this bedroom to make this sort of visually appealing. I've been sleeping here. This is technically my grandmother's house. I've been, I guess, more than sleeping here. I've been living here since about August or so. I love my family. They were there for me every minute of every day when I needed them to be most, which was about this time or so a year ago when I was in the ICU for 2 weeks. And it's another topic that we can get into that's happened since not the one-off Hack Radio back in August, but the last true Hack Radio that was actually on the radio. So that's maybe a topic for another day. Maybe when we bring in our friend Nolan Brown, we can all talk about your reactions when you saw me the first time afterward, and I had lost about 50 pounds very suddenly. But you can only be locked up with your family for so long before you go looking for other alternatives. And fortunately, I guess not fortunately, my grandmother, funnily enough, we were supposed to fly over to France, pick her up, because she had been living 6 months there, 6 months here, and the 6 months were the winter months for various legal reasons that aren't necessary to get into here. So we were due literally to get her during spring break this past spring. So we were going to go, bring her back, and she probably would have gone back to France back in, I guess, October at this point. So she'd be back by now anyway. And obviously that never happened. Now you could argue that I might have been better off taking that flight to Europe and just letting myself get locked out of the U.S. on the way back. We can argue that for weeks.
I don't know if France is where you want to be right now.
I would just say I feel anywhere but here would be fun. But the ultimate point is, by the time August rolled around, you know, it was just you can only take so much. And it's not even that. It's also my sister was with us. Her bedroom next door to mine, next door, a wall over, beds on each side of the wall lined up right on the wall. Any creak anybody makes, whether it's me or her, and you're hearing that shit right in your fucking eardrums when you're trying to sleep. She tried to always play it off as like, she'd either play it off as you're hearing things, or she didn't want to do that. She'd be like, well, I hear everything you do. And I'd be like, okay, well, you never told me this. I'm just trying to get some sleep. So finally one night in August, after about a week of not being able to get sleep, and it was to the point like I didn't know if I could drive over here, and it's a 2-minute drive over. It's that close. I finally was just like, I gotta get out. I gotta be on my own. And it's been a gradual process, and I've just kind of moved all my shit in here one by one. It was like, I think instead of going back home every day to get food, I started buying food and leaving it and putting it in the fridge here. Instead of going home every morning to weigh myself, like, you know, to monitor my weight progression, hopefully going down, not up. I just brought my scale over, you know, rather than going home in the evening to take evening medication and then, you know, bringing morning medication back with me with my breakfast. You bring the bottles over. By mid-September, like, I think I had everything that I needed. I probably should bring more clothes over because I've been wearing the same like 5 shirts every single day. But at the end of it all, here I am, but I haven't done much decorating here. That USF soccer scarf you see back hanging on the door wasn't there until we decided to do this show about 20 minutes ago. And it's the only piece of decorating I've done in the entire house. And for all intents and purposes, this is probably my place of residence for the foreseeable future.
But on behalf of Brian and myself, our hearts go out to all those affected by the pandemic.
You're right. I just rambled on and on about how I had creaking in my ears, and like that was going on before the pandemic anyway. Like, let's not get it twisted. Like, that was nothing new, but it was just, you know, at least during the daytime, I could sleep in the Oracle office.
We've all been affected in different ways, so.
Well, that's the funny thing is, I guess this really isn't funny. So since we're on the topic of maybe taking it seriously, the pandemic seriously, my dad actually tested positive for antibodies, I think in September. And it all kind of like lines up where he was really, really sick with COVID-like symptoms back in mid-June or so. So the timeline adds up. It makes perfect sense that, you know, that was probably it. You know, what he had was not an asthma attack, but, excuse me, live radio. It's not live radio, but it wasn't an asthma attack. It was probably COVID. Fortunately, he recovered, and, you know, obviously he recovered. He tested positive for antibodies. He didn't, you know. So obviously, as a result of that this happening in June, we all decided, we should all get the same tests. So my mom, my sister, and myself later that day got tested. For me, this was my second antibody test because I kind of thought what happened to me in December might have been one of the first U.S. cases of COVID before we knew it was here, but I guess turns out that wasn't the case, and I was just a fat slob. Anyway, nobody else had the antibodies but my sister, and she had no, I'd say, meaningful symptoms. She said that she felt like there might have been a time where she had like a burning sensation in her throat and a worse cough than usual, but like nothing that, raised any like red flags in the house or anything. Like, I mean, the concern was obviously with my dad, more so than, I mean, my sister didn't show any symptoms that would have like, that anyone could see. And I mean, obviously she didn't think of anything of it. So, and I think that actually kind of ties everything home to the point I was trying to make earlier about how the pandemic is still ongoing. When you have something like that going on, because you don't know who gave it to who. It's easy to say, well, my dad probably gave it to my sister because he actually goes out and he's obviously responsible. He's not going out making unnecessary trips. He's a 71-year-old diabetic who's had asthma since he's a teenager. He's not making unnecessary trips. He goes to the bank, goes to the Publix or whatever. He does what he has to do, and that's it. And he wears a mask, and he's not doing anything unnecessary. So it would stand to reason. Meanwhile, my sister wasn't going out much before the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic gave her an excuse not to go out. It actually might be her best friend. So logic stands that, yeah, it was probably that way. But that's not necessarily the case. She had been out. I remember I took her out at one point that around that time, maybe shortly beforehand, to go to a farmer's market near our house. Could have gotten it there. I mean, it's not necessarily about her or someone her age. It's about if she gets it, whether she got it from my dad, maybe then she gets it and then she passes it on to my mom or to me or to anyone else who could have serious, who is in that at-risk category. So she may have been fine. She was fine. There's no problem there. But it's not about her. Obviously, it is about her. You don't want anything bad to happen to her. Don't get that twisted. But it's also not just about her. It's about who she's going to interact with, who she's living with. And meanwhile, my mom tested negative. So she's just as vulnerable now without antibodies. So, that's the thing that gets me is when I hear, and Kevin, we interacted with a shithead on Twitter a couple months ago about this. I won't name names.
Oh, I will. Mitch Davis. What a jackass.
It's such a generic name that could be anyone anyway.
Mitch Davis _8. That's go get him, folks.
Well, there we go. There you go. Anyway, he was basically saying the same jackassery talking points that it's just like the flu. He knew people that had it. It's not a big deal. Just mask up or whatever. Kevin, honestly, you can probably say this better than I could because I didn't have it. And I didn't know my dad had it until, later on. I mean, with all due respect, my dad is a 71-year-old diabetic with asthma. Him having breathing difficulties or spiking blood sugars or whatever is something you expect with the territory. So bells weren't really ringing for me around that time, but they were for you in May.
That's true. Was it May or June? I don't really remember. Uh,
Whatever.
I also do want to point out that we're both broadcasting live from our basements that we're hiding in. Um,
That's a
so,
comment that Mitch made because I mean, I went on a 20-minute rant about where I actually am. So they'll probably get cut out
um,
in post.
all right, well, screw you then.
Go ahead with the fucking
I
comment,
didn't,
motherfucker.
I didn't have the breathing problems, not that I remember, but like I noticed that something was going on. I had a light fever where it wasn't like ruining me, but my head felt hot. The worst part and the thing that would make it stand out from the flu is there was about a 24-hour cycle where I had just pulsating pains up and down. It started in my left leg and then it went to my right leg and I ended up in my right arm. And I I slept maybe 2 hours during that because I just couldn't get to sleep because it was like every 3 seconds there'd be a pulsating burst of pain, and you think go numb to it at some point, but you really don't because it's moving up and down your body. It sucked. It wasn't fun, and I really only had symptoms for 3 days. I was so lucky with what I got away with. So
Uh, and when you hear me coughing and sniffing, don't like assume I'm in any danger right now. I just cleaned my, I guess, true bedroom. Well, did some cleaning yesterday, and there's a lot of fucking dust in there. And I think the next time I go in there to do any more dusting, I'm going to wear a mask and properly wear a mask because, um, I mean, within hours, I was like this. I could not sleep last night. But again, this is not, and this is not the first time it's happened. So like, you're going to hear me coughing. You're going to hear me like it's going to sound like I'm sick. I'm not sick. I'm just sick in the head. But to get back to your point here, I feel like people like Mitch say shit like that because they've never actually had a proper case of the flu, because the flu is no joke either. Because I think this was around the time when you and I would have first actually met, um, but probably before you would have actually known me. So you probably don't remember this week of hell that I went through. So this was January 2018, the first week of the semester. So not exactly the week, I'm going to take any time off from working or from classes because it's the first week back. So, and I know looking back on it, like knowing what we know now after this year, take the sick time that you need when you're sick, even if it's just a day. But this was, and that when you hear people say, we're never going to go back to the old reality. Well, that's part of the old reality. So I don't want to go back to the old reality if that's part of the old reality. We shouldn't be going to work sick. We shouldn't be going to school sick, because you think of the people, the tens of thousands of people that I directly or indirectly exposed to 2 strains of the flu within the span of 5 days. So what happened was I got sick, flu-like symptoms. It wasn't the worst thing in the world that ever happened to me. It was bad. It sucked, but I started to get better in a couple of days' time, much like any other time I've ever gotten sick. What was different was about a day or so after, the symptoms started to subside and I was feeling, back to getting back to, maybe 60, 70%, things really started to tank. And I'm like, the hell's going on here? This isn't normal. This isn't how getting sick, operates for me normally. What's going on here? And I got to the point where one morning I woke up and I was just shivering. It was a January, pretty cold January morning, but nothing to the point where like internally I was cold. And I was arguing with my dad over the heater, like trying to turn the heater up. But I mean, truth be told, I don't think even if I won the argument or he just wasn't home, that there was going to be a high enough temperature to turn that to. I tried going in the shower for some time and turning it up all the way. But again, the problem was inside. I even went to my office at USF and I tried to like sleep in the office because I was like, okay, this building is going to be warm because the door and people and all that, whatever. I lied down on the floor for like 10 minutes, try to close my eyes, and I was like, I got to go to like the fast track urgent care or something. And they're like, yeah, so you had 2 strains of the flu. And I'm like, 2 strains of the flu, huh? And they're like, yeah, so you were just getting better with from the old one when the second one came along. So when you think about something like that, that second strain of the flu that I got, if I had just caught it on its own, it's probably not going to be that bad. It probably would have been just like the first strain of the flu. But what happened was my immune system was fighting off that first strain of the flu and was compromised, because that's what happens. Like, you know, it's attacking the first strain. And meanwhile, it's like, oh, what's that? The Trojan horse, you know, everyone's distracted by the Trojan horse. And then all of a sudden these little influenza B fuckers start to sneak in because nobody's manning the gates. I know that's not how the story goes, but I worked myself into a bind there. Shake your head all you want. I had to get out of that one. But the point is, the same thing can be said about if your immune system is compromised. I can't say that word apparently. Regardless of what age you are, you have an underlying condition, regardless of what age you are, or if you also happen to have the flu at the same time. Let me tell you something. You don't want, even if COVID is just like the flu, which it's not. The flu does not kill nearly as many people per year. Now, we're saying this with the flu vaccine every year, so it's not, I hate to go anywhere on Mitch's side in this argument, but it's not a fair comparison just yet until we have vaccines up and running for COVID. But, you know, you take that example where I had flu A and flu B at the same time. Well, okay, let's say COVID is just like the flu, or just a little bit, or it's a bad flu, I think is what he said. So he admits it's a little bit worse than the flu. So what that means is you're going to get the flu, your immune system is going to be compromised because you're fighting off the flu, and then you're going to get COVID because you're being an idiot and not taking any precautions. Because if you were taking precautions this year, you would have gotten a flu shot and you would be wearing a mask, so you'd be protected from the flu anyway. So how do you think that's going to go?
Not well. Not well.
And it's not just a matter of life or death. I mean, obviously death is probably the worst case outcome. You could argue because, I mean, if you live and you have neurological, cardiological, whatever the term for breathing would be, the
pulmonary.
Yeah, you have all serious kinds of problems as a result of that. But you lived.
Respiratory, not pulmonary.
Respiratory.
I see your point.
I should know that, considering that was one of my issues. But yeah, if you have that for the rest of your life, I don't want to sound cold, but that's going to be a struggle. That'll be a struggle. So it's not just, did you die? It's not like that scene in The Hangover. You're a terrible driver. Yeah, but did you die? Oh, you got COVID. Yeah, but did you die? Yeah, you got COVID. What happened?
I'm concerned we're giving too much time to an idiot that nobody knows about, when we could be giving a lot of time to an idiot that everybody knows about in Dabo Sweeney.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's COVID related, so.
It's all COVID related. Everything's COVID.
Yeah, honestly, pretty much every story we have, even the inspirational story that we'll, I guess, end the show with, that's technically COVID related too. But go ahead with Dabo. Yeah, I mean, but the Dabo Sweeney story is just, I've talked enough. You set this shit up.
I don't know if it's fair to call it a story per se, because that would be implying that it has, I don't know, entertainment. Well, it does have entertainment value, but like
It's
logic
very
or a through line or anything. So I'm going to quickly pull up something to aid me in my point here. But basically, there was a string of positive cases with the Florida State football team, and Clemson was supposed to play FSU in Tallahassee, and the game was postponed on the advice of the FSU physicians and doctors. Most of you already know this story. Uh, the let's call it chicanery from Dabo came in his comments after the game, in which he said that, or I guess before, after the game was canceled or postponed or whatever, is that he said that this wasn't about COVID. This was because Florida State was too scared to play Clemson. And I want to direct you to FSU's schedule this year. They had a 3-point loss at home to Georgia Tech. They got blown out on the road against Miami, gave up 52 points. They had closer than it should have been game against JV State. Uh, they put up a respectable fight at Notre Dame. They won a close game against UNC. Then they got blown out by Louisville, blown out by Pitt, and basically blown out by NC State. So I don't know what Dabo thinks, because, like, the point I made when this all happened is that to say that FSU is being cowardly by postponing this game is to ignore the reality of the other 8 games they've played this year. Because you could, like, why is Clemson the game they want to avoid instead of going to Notre Dame? Wouldn't they want to avoid that game? They wouldn't even have to travel. They could have saved some money on that. Why why does he think that FSU of all schools is going to duck a Clemson game despite this previous record? And probably the stupidest part of this is that this game does not matter for either team. Clemson was going to win. They were going to blow FSU out of the water. That is a given. The only way that this could have impacted Clemson's playoff schedule or playoff possibility is if they lost. They could only lose by playing this game. So in a way, Dabo should understand the implications of this and just shut up. But he's a dumbass and can't understand rationale, and so he opened his big dumb college football coach brain, and that brain connected to his mouth, and he went in front of the reporters and said what he said. I've said this before. I'll say it again. We should abolish college football. It is highly entertaining, but it enables a lot of stupid people to high places in society that they don't deserve to be in. And I think we gotta get rid of that. Obviously, you could start with places like the stock market too, but I don't know. I think college football, for all the good it does, it elevates some pretty stupid people.
I can't remember who there was a situation back in 2017. It was either with USF or UCF. I think it was with UCF and Georgia Tech, where Georgia Tech was supposed to come down and play at the bounce house against UCF. And Hurricane Irma came through. But Irma came through at that point probably 2 weeks prior. So Memphis came down, and they were supposed to UCF handled the Memphis cancellation wrong or postponement wrong, where they moved the game up, and then Memphis traveled for the game at the new game time. They got there the night before, and then UCF basically said, "You guys need to go back. We're not going to play this game this week." So that was kind of a not great way to handle it. But the next week was when the problem really happened, when the National Guard was using Spectrum Stadium as a site to do something for Irma relief. I don't know if it was like that was where they were distributing stuff, or that was just where they were setting up base. But Spectrum Stadium had a higher purpose that weekend, so they couldn't play football there. And I could be completely misremembering this, but UCF got shat on because they weren't able to play that game. They weren't able to reschedule. They wound up rescheduling the Memphis game because that was more important at the end of the day. It was a conference game, but they never rescheduled the Georgia Tech game, and I don't think they ever made it up even in a different year. But the long and short of that is, we hear this all the time where these coaches or these fans, or they take any sort of postponement or cancellation and they take it as an affront if it's an inferior and objectively inferior opponent doing so, even if it's in the case of good common sense, where FSU had COVID concerns and they were well within the right that on that alone to postpone the game then and there, which we know that's not how that goes. But also with Clemson coming to town, Dabo has shown and Clemson has shown that they just do not give a shit. They have been one of the worst at enforcing COVID protocols. They're up there with the fucking Baltimore Ravens. Like, you want to talk about college football not being professional because they're amateur athletes. These athletes are acting like professionals right now in one sense. I mean, Clemson could be the worst representative of how to handle college football in the COVID pandemic era. So you have these two things. It has nothing to do, in my mind, of not wanting to get blown out from a football perspective. Because like you said, why would you go to South Bend? Why would you play Georgia Tech? Why would you play any of these other games? And then all of a sudden, Clemson's coming to your house. To your house. Why would you go to Notre Dame? Why would you, if you're looking to cancel games, why would you not cancel that game? That's a very good point. It's because of the way Dabo's been treating this entire situation, and basically the way Dabo's been acting the entire year. Every time he's opened his mouth, whether it's been about COVID, whether it's been about racial injustice, he's sounded like a fucking idiot.
Look, God wanted them to play college football this year, and I don't think that's a Dabo quote, but it could be, and that's the point. Let's not
Somebody's
forget.
probably said that at some point or another.
Let's not forget that Trevor Lawrence is probably the highest profile case of an athlete getting COVID since Rudy Gobert, and he had it. And 2 or 3 days later, he was sitting on the bench at a Clemson game. He wasn't allowed to play, but he was there, and he was with his teammates. And sure,
and then there was that one shot
on the sideline.
There was that one shot of him talking to a teammate and doing that stupid bullshit you see at the grocery store all the time, where he's taking the fucking mask off to talk.
So yeah, like, I wouldn't want to have to line up against 11 players from that team and touch them and exchange liquids inadvertently, because that's what happens in that sport. I don't know. The other thing I was thinking about is probably the two best college football coaches right now, at least, are Dabo, who has shown himself to be a complete and utter moron, and Nick Saban, who shows up on the recruiting trail with lifetime contracts that force recruits to sell their soul to the University of Alabama to play for them. And by the way, Nick Saban, the only person in college football confirmed that has gotten it twice. So what does that tell you about Nick Saban?
Didn't they say, though, that it was likely the first time was a false positive?
Yeah.
Or was that debunked?
I don't know. I don't know.
They're giving them the rapid test because that's the only way you could give them 3 tests a week and have it mean any sort of anything.
I'm very proud of the fact that I haven't watched a single snap of college football this year, so I couldn't tell you. I've just, all this stuff I get is stuff that I either find an article on Twitter or people just talking about it on Twitter. That's the extent of me following college football this year.
It brings up the interesting conundrum that I've always kind of had about college football and in relation to other college sports, maybe with the exception of men's basketball. And I guess maybe women's basketball at like places like UConn and Tennessee, where the idea of, and maybe some exceptions for some players here and there, on non-revenue sports, but the idea of intercollegiate athletics was always, or at its heart, and what you'll hear from, administrators and communications personnel and all those people, is these are student athletes, that these are students of the university. They came to the university first and foremost to get an education, and then they're playing Division I athletics at the same time. But that, we know that's not how that works. That may be true at the Division III level and probably the Division II level, and maybe even in football at the FCS level. But you go to a school like Alabama or Clemson, and you're not enrolling for the, and I'm not here shitting on any academics of Alabama or Clemson. They're good schools academically, for all I know. I have no reason to believe otherwise. Yeah, I have no reason to believe otherwise. Alabama absolutely is. But I'm not here trying to shit on that. But what I am trying to say is, Trevor Lawrence didn't go to Clemson for any academic program at Clemson. He went to Clemson to play for Dabo Swinney and Clemson.
And he's going to leave Clemson before he finishes his schooling.
Joe Burrow last year at, oh my God, I forgot where he went to school. LSU. For some reason I was thinking Ohio State, but no, he's in Ohio professionally. Good.
He was at Ohio State, and then he transferred.
Anyway, Joe Burrow, to my knowledge, didn't take any in-person classes last year.
That tracks.
That to me is not someone being, and I say this as someone who spent the last 2 years in a mostly online graduate program. But I tried to take in-person classes when I could, but that was the curriculum. But you're talking about, these are athletes that are coming. The goal in mind is to play high-level football or high-level basketball. It is not. It's to represent. Yes, it's to represent the name on the front of the jersey, but in the same sense that when they get to the next level, they're trying to represent the name on the jersey in the same sense. But it's also still about the name on the back, because they're trying to up their draft stock, or if they're realistic and, being realistic, just trying to get to that next level, however they do. So that's where I've always kind of had this disconnect, because I remember there was one time early on in my time at the Oracle, I wrote an article or a column that was not well received by USF Athletics. And the first time I officially ever met, because thinking back, I actually met him earlier at the Birmingham Bowl, but we didn't introduce it or anything. But the first time I ever introduced myself to the head of communications at USF Athletics, Brian Segrist, he said to me that he brought up that column because he remembered my name. And he said he wanted to make sure that we were, I was treating the student athletes with, fairness and respect or whatever. And he dropped some line, from what I remember, something along the lines of, they're your classmates or something like that. And I'm just thinking that, yes, I had classes with, student athletes before. As Kevin has dropped off.
I'm back.
Okay. That something weird flashed on my screen when he dropped off, so it was impossible not to acknowledge that. But yes, I have had student athletes in my, as classmates before. And, they're the ones that I've had and have worked with have been great. But you also have to acknowledge that, at least when it comes to football, at a school like USF, even, that they could be likely getting this education anywhere they want to get it. The reason that they're here. The reason that they're here is because they want to play football. That's just the way I've always seen it. And that's where I kind of get this disconnect that, it's not school pride that the players are playing for. Maybe that's what the fans and the stands are for. And it's easier to connect to that than it is some random professional sports franchise that can up and move town at any time they don't get a stadium deal done. The university is not going anywhere, most likely. That doesn't happen. That would be very unprecedented. So it's easier to connect with that university than it would be a professional sports franchise, even though the player turnover is always going to be more so than a professional sports franchise. But I just find it at this level, the level that we're talking about, FBS, harder to connect to the players. But don't get me wrong, it's not everyone. There are some great guys on the USF football team, and I can name probably a dozen that I really like, or liked in the years that I covered it. However they wound up here, it doesn't really matter. We all wound up somewhere for a reason. But then there are other guys that just feel like they're here because it is their best opportunity to get to the next level. And it feels like for these revenue sports, more guys fall into that category than the latter at these big universities.
And
so that's always been my conundrum with college football.
And to connect it, the point here is that if that's the reason they're here, they're not here for an education primarily, then they should, one of two things. They should be paid, or they shouldn't have to play, or they shouldn't be pressured into playing in the middle of a pandemic. And there is the problem.
So to get to the point about should they be paid, here's where I come out on this. I was a graduate assistant at USF during my time as a grad student. And as part of that, I got a tuition reimbursement. At one point, it was way better than it wound up being at the end, but it was still something. I'll actually just name it. It initially was 80% of my entire tuition. And then later on, it was because I shifted programs and bit myself in the foot financially because of that. The deferment only was the equivalent of 3 credit hours. Again, that's not nothing, but certainly was better at the onset. But that's a heavy thing that the university is paying. It's basically like an athletic scholarship, but it's coming out of an academic budget rather than an athletic budget. I still got a paycheck every 2 weeks from the University of South Florida for the work that I did. So the idea that both can't happen, I don't understand why. If the College of Arts and Sciences can pay me, and we're not talking about giving them multi-million-dollar contracts. I'm talking about giving them some money for some food during the off season, or just money in general, whatever they do with it. That USF didn't track what I did with they called it a stipend. Give the players a stipend. My stipend was, I don't remember, but I think it came out to $301 every 2 weeks when it was the 3 credit hours. It was more when it was 80% because there's just a bigger budget to work with. But you're looking at that $301, every 2 weeks. That's about $150 every week. You know, that was, you pair that with the Oracle money, and I'd say it was decent take-home pay for being in grad school. Not everyone is so fortunate. And football players are definitely not so fortunate. So I just don't understand where you can get off and just say, yeah, we can't throw them. Now, again, there's a lot of players on the team. You're talking about 100 players. You know, they were in the latter where we're talking about, 301 for every 2 weeks. There were 3 of us, grad assistants. So, you know, it's tough to say, well, we can pay 100 guys $100, $150 every week, but also, you know, the football team is probably bringing in more money. It's, you know, there are budgetary things that need to be weighed one way or the other. That it's just, I don't get how you can say, well, we could pay the grad assistant in the journalism department $150 as a stipend, but we can't pay the players.
Well, and of course, the work you did contributed to millions of dollars in revenue and sponsorship deals. Of course, you know, you wore a Nike patch on your polo that they gave you, and that was part of an endorsement deal. Like, the thing a lot of people don't realize is that, yes, a lot of money that is generated is reinvested back into the school, but there's a reason for that, and that reason is they don't have to pay taxes on that money if they reinvest it right away. Because if they spend it all, it's not going to get taxed. So if they didn't have to spend it all, say installing new smoothie vending machines for football players in the workout room, that sort of stuff, or a cool looking fountain, or I don't know, a lazy river for the student athletes, something like that.
Where have we heard that one before?
If you're not spending it on that, there's plenty of money to pay the players. And like you mentioned, you're not talking about multi-million-dollar contracts. I kind of am. I think that there are plenty of college athletes, aka Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, those kind of players who would be worth multi-million dollars eventually, according to the market. And if they're worth that, they should get paid that. But that's a different conversation.
Well, and that's where the endorsement deals can come
right.
in. They'll get endorsement deal, or players like that will get endorsement deals. So I'm not worried about that. I'm talking about let's make sure the third string offensive lineman can get food in the off season.
For sure.
Like, just give them enough money for that. That's what I want to see.
And
that doesn't need to be even in the thousands of dollars. That just needs to be him being taken care of.
So as I was saying, abolish college football. We don't need it. We can find something else to do with our Saturdays. Trust me. You ever tried Sudoku? Sudoku's fun. That you'll enjoy that. I'm just saying.
I don't
so
want
many
to see,
great things.
I don't want to. It's that conflict. Because you know, growing up in Florida, I'd say it's bigger than, especially in some parts of the state, it's bigger than the NFL in certain parts of the state. And even if someone's a big NFL fan, they've got a college team here too, and it's usually
and they don't know about it.
Well,
They're unaware.
I was trying to find the creative way of making reference to garnet and gold and blue and orange, but basically saying if someone, it's the same thing you were saying, but I was trying to be more cute about it, but you swooped in there. I don't want to see a world without college football, but I do think this pandemic has kind of exposed a lot of that hypocrisy that, you know, this isn't being done in the interest of the student athletes. This isn't being done in the interest of the players or player safety. It's never really been about that. If it were about that, I mean, we wouldn't be playing unpaid football. Unpaid football wouldn't exist. Unpaid tackle, full contact football wouldn't exist. But it does. So here we are. But it was easier to look the other way last year. When we're not in the middle of a pandemic,
right.
Where people are dying. You know,
like I've heard the argument being made that like, men's basketball, NCAA, they can't lose this basketball season too. Like they have to play the full season because they lost so much money last year and they can't lose as much money. Where like, actually they can because it's all fake. All when you get to that kind of dollar amounts, it's all fake. It's all inflated. You don't. I'm trying to find the words here. Like money
You
is
have
made
a
up.
I was going to say you have a $1 billion deal with CBS to broadcast the Final Four. Show me those $1 billion.
Seriously, and like in talking about college football,
Like literally show me those $1 billion in
they will
banknotes.
never.
They don't exist.
Especially when we're talking about college football. These games are scheduled 7 years in advance. That is made up.
There was
It's made up.
I can't remember what it was, but there was a game between two Power Fives. Notre Dame, I think, was one of them. I cannot remember. Notre Dame and Georgia, scheduled for 17 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember tweeting about it at the time, saying that it's bordering on the point where someone who could be a participant in this game has not been born yet. We're not there yet because 17 years is not old enough, but we're not that far off. If they're scheduling 17 years now, well, those dates are going to get booked up very quickly. We're going to have to start looking at 18, 19 years down the road to book up these dates.
Like
so that's ridiculous.
I can't wait for the University of Florida to schedule a home and home with the University of Texas in the year 2045 and in a couple of years. And then that game's going to have to be postponed or relocated because, of course, Ben Hill Griffin Stadium is going to be underwater when that game finally rolls around. Like it's so ridiculous. This sport has been built up. Even 30 years ago, it was a different kind of sport. Most of these kids aren't even going to sniff the professional. They're okay with that. It's just localized stuff. And now we're talking billions of dollars being moved around on the backs of these unpaid, uncompensated kids who, for many, their lives, this is the peak of their lives. And then some of them have to work 9-to-5 jobs. Some of them have to work remedial, retail jobs.
You can't do that when you're in season, at least. That's just not possible.
You could. You just have to have the will.
You could, but then you also have to still. You're a student athlete. Remember that. You still have to find some way to.
No. I'm talking.
And then
about, I'm talking about when they're done playing.
Oh,
like they're not going to play professionally, and some of these people will be working in fast food, which I'm not knocking it, but you're like, they're getting a college education.
It's a far cry from and that's the thing. You talk about, you hear these people talk about, they're getting this free college education. Well, first of all, not every single player on the team is getting a scholarship or a full scholarship. Your Joe Burrow, or I guess Trevor Lawrence is this year would be more relevant. Yes, he is, but is the third string long snapper? He might be getting something. He might be getting he might be getting my second tuition reimbursement, more closer to the first one, the 30 credits off rather than the 80% of it all. He might be getting that, but he's not getting a full ride. And you're trying to find a way to put it, but not all classes are created equal. And we saw that at North Carolina with regards to basketball a couple of years. Or is it Duke? It was UNC. They had these fake paper classes. I don't remember if it was just a completely fake bullshit, never actually do anything class, or if it was like you write one paper and it's like a 2-page essay or whatever. But whatever it was, memories fade, and I don't really think I ever read the full story. But it was, that's the kind of stuff that Power 5 schools were doing. So you're telling me that, okay, they have this college degree. In what? No, again, not everyone's doing that. That's important to stress. But, like you're saying, well, how does somebody, you're saying somebody played college football is going to wind up with a 4-year degree and then wind up working fast food after they're done playing. How does that happen? Well, that's how that happens. They don't have a real degree.
Well, and a story we're going to transition to here in a couple minutes, but look at the SEC. A lot of these schools don't have men's soccer teams, and they have women's soccer teams. They don't have men's soccer teams. Why is that? Well, because Title IX, you have to balance out the amount of money you invest in men's sports and women's sports. And because there are so many freaking players on a college football team, specifically in the SEC, with a lot of strong, traditionally powerful football teams, they have so many freaking players, they can't afford to allot for a men's soccer team because then they would have to cut the 5th and 6th guys on the depth chart at each position. Like some college football programs have more athletes in them than the rest of the athletics combined, men and women. It's ridiculous the team sizes. Like I want to say, I forget which team it was, but last year when we covered college football, one team had, including the inactives, 127 players. That is enough for 2.5 NFL rosters. What are we doing? Like, we don't need that many.
Easy there, 12. But yeah, no, I remember because I was doing an article, or I did a column toward the, I think it was in February, about how USF should retire 8 and 9 for Guthrie and Flowers, and I needed something to balance out why college football teams tend to not retire numbers. So I was like, okay, well, what was USF's roster last year? Because I could look up an extreme example of that, but that's not relevant because I'm not writing about that team. USF had about, I think, 105 players on their roster in 2019. So you're talking about an AAC school, probably should have had a bit more depth, to be quite frank, last year. And that's what they had. They had more than 100 players on their fucking roster. So yeah, you make a good point. Like, you need 5 straight. I don't get it. I don't understand why you would need 3 times the size of an NFL roster. Now, I get it this year where you got COVID considerations where you might need to go 3, 4, 5 deep at a position just to be safe. But that also brings us back to the whole idea of should we be playing? But if you're going to play, you probably need to go deeper this year than most other years. So to stick with the idea of that, yeah, to transition to what I think it's an uplifting story. I'm thrilled about it. I'm
Upliftingly depressing.
I'm not thrilled about. Yeah, there are some elements to it that, like, on both sides of it, why it happened, and then the reaction from Twitter, which, I mean, let's just say it here. Fuck you, Twitter. Just, that's evergreen. Like, you can clip that and, like, use that whenever. Like, just tweet it out whenever. Fuck you, Twitter. But Vandy, not having a good time with their kickers. And I forget, is it... Some are out. One was out injured. A couple were out with just regard to COVID protocols. So they were to the point where they didn't have any kickers at all. And as you mentioned, the SEC does not sponsor men's soccer. There are some programs in the SEC that do have men's soccer teams. I cannot remember where they play. They play in other big conferences, but Vanderbilt is not one of them. But they were without a kicker. And because in a normal circumstance, what do? You're going to maybe hold tryouts, put out a blast saying we need a kicker, come out and we'll try you out. Or if you're at a school that has men's soccer, pull from the men's soccer team. Well, you're not in that situation if you're Vanderbilt during COVID times. I think most of the students were off campus already by this point, and they, again, do not have a men's soccer team. So you need someone who can kick a football. So they had, I think the only healthy person who could do kickoffs was someone who was like a 290 defensive end, 290-pound defensive end. Like, I think it's like one of those situations where like he can do it. He'd be like, the coach comes up to him and is just like, hey man, whatever his name is, hey man, can you kick? And be like, yo, I can do it. You want me to do it? I can do it. Like, I kicked a football before. But like, I think you're in that situation where you want to have someone who probably is not a defensive end and probably has kicked a ball more recently at some sort of competitive level. So enter Vanderbilt, the 2020 SEC women's soccer, well, SEC soccer, because there is no men's soccer, SEC soccer champions of all of 1 week. They won the championship, I believe, a week ago tonight, which would be Sunday. So Vanderbilt's goalkeeper, Sarah Fuller, was offered this opportunity to come in, and I'm not even sure it was a tryout. I think it was just, I think I have the New York Times article pulled up, and there was a quote that really got to me because it was just kind of like just how quickly it happened for her. Forgive me, but the show is called Hack Radio.
She did full pad walkthroughs, and then.
Well, that's not what it is. That's not. But yeah, you can go ahead with what happened. But Fuller helped Vanderbilt clinch its first SEC women's soccer title since 1994 with a 3-1 victory over Arkansas last Sunday. She was planning to head home to Wiley, Texas for the Thanksgiving holiday when her soccer coach called her with the opportunity to kick this weekend, she told reporters after the game. Quote, "I'll be there within the hour," she recalled saying to Ken Masser, I apologize, the team's associate head coach. So that's how quickly that kind of happened, where she didn't really have time to even think about it. It was like, are you going to do this? Yes or no? Answers now. And she said yes, and she suited up. She is not the first woman to play in FBS football, but she did become the first to play, not suit up, but play in a Power 5 game when she kicked off to start the second half against Mizzou on Saturday afternoon. And it's one of those moments that obviously, if not for COVID, doesn't happen, but you're still happy to see it regardless, because it's still a glass ceiling shattered for women in sports. And to me, I think that is the important takeaway here, that this happened. Now, however we get there,
it's the Larry David shrugging gif. That's the perfect encapsulation of what it feels like.
It happened, yeah. And, it's important that it happened. The first step in change that you want to see is taking that first step. And if it has to be because of COVID, you obviously hope everyone's okay, but that's the way it's going to be. What I think is key, though, is the next step. Will we see her play next week against Georgia? That's important. And she's obviously a senior, so we, no matter what, won't see her next year. But who will be the next woman in Power 5 football?
Well,
When will that happen?
I think the more important question is, even if we do see her next week, will she be able to attempt a kick? Because she did not get to.
The key thing I want to say is, I mentioned Fuller is not the first woman to play college football
third,
in
I think.
FBS. Katie Hinda was the first woman to score in an FBS game as a place kicker for New Mexico in 2003. April Gross scored while playing for Kent State in 2015. 2015 is not that long ago, but 2003 to 2015 is a long time. So the question then becomes, okay, well, when does that next Power 5 moment come? If it's not next week, and even if it is next week, who's going to be number 2? Because you're not taking any steps until you've taken that second step. Right now, your feet are on the ground, and that's, you got to get your feet on the ground to walk. But you then have to take that second step. And could not be happy for Sarah Fuller and for women in general. I mean, just reading Twitter from Blue Checkmarks was inspirational on Saturday afternoon. But when is that next moment going to come? Because I don't think there's ever going to be a moment where it's going to be a common occurrence in football. It's just not going to be. I don't want to seem pessimistic, but it's not. But I would like to see it not be rare.
Well,
I think if you can kick, you can kick.
A good example of this is Willie O'Ree, who is well known as being the first African descended person to play in the NHL. He made his debut in 1958. His career didn't last very long. It was only 12 games. He got there. And then it took another 16 years for another player to make it. So
that's the issue.
Yeah.
That's the issue here. It's like, great, this happened. Vandy was in a bad situation, though. That's the thing.
Right. Sometimes it's a Jackie Robinson situation, and then there's a flood of people. Sometimes a barrier is broken, but nobody wants to be the next person, or
Jackie Robinson was not the first. That's the thing. Jackie Robinson was not the first.
Well, he's the first.
He was the one
person to make it.
No. I there were several, and I'm not talking Negro leagues right now. I'm saying, and the Baseball Hall of Fame should, or I think they
don't get sidetracked. Keep going.
The Negro League should be acknowledged as a major league. But the point is, Jackie Robinson was not the first black player in the major leagues, but he was the first one to, I guess, stick and keep that door open. So the question is, all right, Sarah Fuller is not going to be the first one. She will be for Power 5, but she's not the first one to open that door. But will that door remain open afterward? And will we be in that situation where, let's be honest, Fuller didn't have a fair chance of a high performance on Saturday? Because like you said, it was like, I think she had 3 days notice, went through a walkthrough, and had just come off less than a week ago playing soccer. And I think this was her first time ever. I don't know if it was her first time ever kicking a football, but in any sort of meaningful, not in your backyard anymore. I'm sure growing up in Texas, she probably has kicked a football, but in any sort of meaningful way, that was her first time kicking a football on Saturday. So, you're kind of set up for that situation where there was no way that she was going to come out there and kick a 50-yard field goal. That was just impossible. to ever expect that to happen, at least for that game against Mizzou. Her only opportunity to kick wound up being that kickoff, and it wound up being a really well-executed squib kick. And, you know, you were saying before we started the show that that's actually harder to do than just booming a kick, but I think the key thing is you wanted to eliminate a return, because if you kick it short, and short is relative, short is anything before the goal line, that's you're taking it out for a return. You don't know what's going to happen then. And you don't want that first kickoff to be returned to the house. That would be the worst thing optics wise for everyone. And I'm not saying, you know, you want to go and give her any charity or anything or whatever, but you can't let that happen. So the squib kick was the only responsible thing to do, I think, on that kick. And she executed it perfectly. It was I hate to say any squib kick was beautiful, but as far as squib kicks go, it was a beautiful squib kick. And you know it was meant to be a squib kick because before she even kicked the ball, you could see the coverage team going in that direction. That was intentional. So when you see these idiots on Twitter making these comments saying that was the worst kick I've ever seen, I assure you it wasn't the worst kick you've ever seen. But it's not even like top 500 worst kicks I've ever seen. It was what it was meant to be. Now, you could argue, was that the right kick? Was that the right call? Guess what? She's not the coach. She's not calling the plays. She's not the one saying squib it. But she did her job, and it was an effective squib kick. There was no return.
And the coach is a coward because they had a chance to kick a field goal in the third quarter, I'm pretty sure. And they didn't. They went for it on 4th and 4, down by several scores.
We were also talking about this, too. I saw comments on Reddit, so you take this for what it's worth there, too. But people were saying that her warm-ups weren't the best. And again, kicking a field goal is fucking hard to do. So the idea is I don't think that they were going to send her out to kick a field goal unless it was something you have reasonable confidence she's going to hit. And I think you said that that field goal would have been like 40-something yards.
It would have been about 42 yards. And it was the fourth quarter, not the third.
You have to understand that place kicking is a lot different than kicking a soccer ball. You know, you don't want to set someone out there who she has a target on her back for an I guess arbitrary is the word I'm looking for, but for a silly reason. The same arbitrary reason, I guess, you bring up Jackie Robinson when we were talking about the color barrier in baseball. Jackie Robinson had an arbitrary target on his back that he couldn't control either. So you don't want to send out players like that who have these targets on their back already and set them up for failure. And I'm, again, not trying to say you need to give her charity or anything. She's on the team because she's an athlete. She is an athlete at an SEC school who kicks a ball. That alone qualifies her to be a place kicker. But you don't want that first opportunity in that first Power 5 moment when she's had all of 72 hours to prepare herself mentally, let alone physically. You can't do that. I would have loved to have seen it, but I think the only realistic thing is if it's extra point range or slightly longer. I don't think it was ever going to happen on anything outside of 30. And we'll never know because Vandy sucks so much that was the only opportunity. But I don't think it would have been the responsible thing in the same sense that you didn't have her kick it deep, her leg would not be prepared for it. That's the thing. And by all stretch of the imagination, I think, you give her the chance, and maybe you give her this week to prepare herself, and we're talking a different story. But, I'll take the example of, well, when you and I met to kick around my Australian football. Let's be honest here. Your kicks at first, and probably still, were not the same as my kicks, because I'd been doing it for, at that point, several months, and you had never seen an Australian football before in your life. You have to acclimate your leg to something different. It's a different ball, different shape. And you cannot set her out if you're not 95% certain she's going to make the kick.
I understand that logic. I think nobody's life's at stake.
No, but in the same sense, nobody's life was, maybe when the Dodgers were playing spring training in the South, but nobody's life was at stake when Jackie Robinson was being hurled racial slurs at him. Nobody's life was at stake. But why would you? I think it's the reason that the Dodgers left Daytona, because they wouldn't let him room with the rest of the team, and the hotels weren't integrated. I could be completely misremembering every fact about that story, but they left whatever city it was for similar reasons. And nobody's life is at stake. He can just stay somewhere else. But it's not the right thing to do. Morally, it's not the right thing to do. It's not the right thing to do to somebody that as a coach, your duty is to protect this player physically and mentally. And Twitter is a fucking cesspool. I'll say it again. Fuck you, Twitter. People can tag her. People would tag her. I'm sure people have tagged her because they think the squib kick is the worst kick they've ever seen. You can't set someone up for failure like that. If especially when they're doing you a favor, a big favor like that. Like, yes, she's breaking the glass ceiling, but she's also doing the football team a big favor by just being there. So it's that. I get it. I would have loved to have seen it, but I mean, I think you have to give her the chance to kick field goals in practice first.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, think about it this way. Have you ever kicked a field goal?
Yes.
How long was it, and was it successful on your first try?
It was yesterday, and yes, 40 yards.
Yesterday?
I was playing as the Buccaneers. Ryan Suckup kicked the game-winning field goal. It was a glorious day for me.
Well, I've been to the NFL Experience, and let me tell you about trying to kick a freaking field goal off the ground. That's the thing about how, like, when I was, kicking with that Australian football, is like you're basically drop punting everything on the run. And I know that sounds hard, but it's a lot easier because you've already got that elevation. As long as you boot the ball in the right place, that ball's going to go where you want it to go. But trying to get elevation on a ball that's on the ground is hard. Now, you're saying, okay, well, you're doing that as a goalkeeper in soccer already. It's less.
That's round.
It's round, but it's also less critical where it goes. A field goal, that ball needs to go through the uprights. If you miss your teammate, but you still hit another teammate with that kick, that goal kick, nobody even knows. I'm not trying to trivialize the goalkeeper position in soccer, but nobody knows. Nobody cares. And even if you don't hit your teammate, it's not a big deal. Again, a field goal, the success of a field goal is pretty black and white. it goes to the uprights, you score 3 points, or it doesn't, and the kick was a failure. So, it just to add to that difficult, different shape ball, all these different factors here. I love to see what she could do with a full week of practice. Will we see that next week? I hope so. I hope we get a fair chance to see her do what she can do. And that way we can see if the door will remain open. I think a lot of it does hinge on whether she's successful or not. And right now, obviously, we don't have anything to go. We have that one squib kick, and anybody who has any sort of fucking brain will know that that was a successfully executed kick according to what the play was called. And you can say it was a bad call all you want. That's on coaching. That's not on the kicker. So, but we don't have a reasonable sample to talk about place kicking, or I guess not place kicking, but as much as field goal kicking, kicking through the uprights. I hope she gets the opportunity, but I think it would have been irresponsible to do it. And I wonder if they had even been in the situation where they needed the PAT, would they have just gone for 2? Was she ever actually going to get the opportunity to kick a field goal?
We really would need to be having this conversation if an NFL team would just suck it up and sign Carly Lloyd already. But, what are you going to do? Carly Lloyd can do it.
When asked after the game if the team would have Fuller kick against Georgia next week, quote, if she wants to kick and she's available, we'd love to have her. And Fuller said, quote, I would love to get out there and score a field goal. So clearly, I think more likely than not, there will be a chance to see that. But I just think that given the turnaround here, it would not have ended the way we wanted it to end. It would have probably not been this. I think we got that moment that we wanted, and that was the only moment we were going to get. And they would have probably gone for 2 or had that defensive end kick. And I think the opportunity is next week. I just think that's a more realistic way of looking at it. And sure, it would be nice to see an NFL team sign Carly Lloyd or whoever. But yeah, we've got to see it successful where the door is open first. Or the door is open now, so let's see it, is what I think is a way of putting it. But I'm disappointed. I think to sum it up, I'm disappointed we didn't see it. But I think now that I've had, what has it been, 36 hours to kind of like process it, I think it was the right decision to not have her attempt any field goals. Not that there were many opportunities for it, but like you said, there was an opportunity in the third quarter where it would not have been an unrealistic kick.
You know what I think? I think we should see a Taika Waititi written and directed movie about the post-war Viet Cong. I think that would be a fascinating film.
Made that joke already, but it's too bad Robin Williams is dead.
Different joke, actually. But you said you were going to cut it, and I had to find a way to get it in.
So, I think the key question for me now is, and I think we've spent all the time we need to spend on the Twitter trolls, because I mean, they were what you expected, and they were not well thought out. I love any moment that, what's the word I'm looking for, helps women in sports. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but I've never quite understood is it inferiority complex some guys seem to have when a woman does anything sports related, anything, write a fucking game recap, and you'll see the micro penises just come out of the woodwork on Twitter. And I don't understand what is so intimidating about this. Is it a matter of you're scared that now all of a sudden they're infringing on your space? Are you scared that there are women who could kick your ass? What are you scared of? I genuinely would like to know. Like, this is like, I'm taking a sarcastic tone because that's just how I talk, and that's just the nature of the show. But what are you actually scared of? Because you have to be scared. There's no other reason to leave comments like that or tweet stuff like that at female reporters, female athletes. I think that covers the basis of what I was talking about. I think that's a wide.
Coaches.
Female. Well, yeah. If you're tweeting at a coach in general, just shut the fuck up. They're not reading their feed anyway. But what are you scared of? Because you have to be scared of something.
I think it's about, if we want to focus on the playing, they were raised and they grew up in a world where tough men play the sports ball and tough men go out there, they put on the jersey, they represent me. And I wanted to be that, but that's okay. I couldn't. I'm going to channel it through them. What's that? A woman? No. Like, I think that's as simple as it needs to be. And to try to find any other explanation is to give relevance or to give credence to the idea that the way these people think is something to be taken seriously or rationally.
But I always think of this. I think of the way that my parents not raised me, but the way my household was growing up, where my mom didn't really care about sports, actually doesn't care at all about sports, and as a result, my sister was brought up to not care about sports. My dad would take me to games. So it would be, he and I would go to Rays, Lightning, Bucks games, et cetera. And my mom and sister would stay out of that realm completely. And I'm not saying anything would have been different otherwise had my sister been roped in, to it at an early age. But like, now she's just the same, doesn't care at all about sports or whatever. But like, once I got out of that little bubble there and explored the world, which is this whole point of college, you sort of start to see that there are a lot of women who are sports fans. There are a lot of good female athletes, and that they can play just as well, if not better, than the men. And I think a very good example is of the crest I'm wearing, where there are 4 stars here. You can't see it because the 4th one is gold. This is really hard to do because it's inverted. For the women's U.S. soccer team, and the men didn't qualify for the 2018 World Cup. So it's one of those things that you're right. We're giving it too much thought because it's just an asinine way to think. But you're talking about, well, they're brought up to think like this. But that doesn't mean that's how you have to live your life. When you're given new evidence and you're shown new evidence, that's when you're supposed to evolve your thinking.
Let me introduce you to American politics, Brian.
But I thought we were supposed to stick to sports.
Whatever. I could even do you one better with the U.S. Women's National Team example. The Chicago hockey team in the NHL, I won't say their name.
The Redskins.
They hired a little known athlete named Kendall Coyne Schofield, who was one of the breakout stars of the women's national hockey team that won the gold medal in South Korea. they hired her to be a player development coach, and I genuinely believe that she can play on their third line. She has the speed, she has the puck skills. I don't know about adapting to the game speed in the NHL, but she has the foot speed for it. And I made the joke, the like, why? Okay, but why didn't they just sign her to a contract? But like, genuinely, in a different world, Kendall Coyne Schofield could be playing in the NHL. I don't think she's putting up 100 points, but she could be a respectable third line winger.
I
But
see.
it's the world we live in.
I see these comments all the time too, where you know, they're these slippery slope comments, like, oh, now all of a sudden, you know, if you have a woman on a football team, why can't you have a man on a women's soccer team? And it's just, that's not what's going to happen here. Like, first of all, there's no respectable organization playing women's football. I think the Lingerie Football League still exists, and I think they're professionals. But yeah, they're playing in bras and panties. So I'm not taking that league that seriously. They're serious athletes. They're athletes. Don't get me wrong, but I can't take that league seriously. There's no other equivalent, and I don't think it's that slippery of a slope. I think there are interesting questions that do need to be interesting might not be the right word, but I think there are questions that probably should be addressed when it comes to transgender athletes. Where do they fall in terms of a men's sport, women's sport? If it's football, it's football. That's just the way it is. I think I think it's really even a case-by-case basis, but I don't even think acknowledging those athletes that exist, that doesn't make it a slippery slope. That just means we're trying to find a solution to a problem. And I don't understand what the problem would be if it just, like you said, in a different world where we just wound up, if you're a good hockey player, you're a good hockey player. But I think the problem is, it's going to sound so cliche, but the patriarchy of the way the world is and really used to be, men were the ones who were playing sports. So the default to go to was the best hockey players were men, because they were the only ones playing hockey. And it kind of evolved. And now, you know, you're trying to grow the game at that women's level, but it's never going to be the same because it just didn't go side by side.
And they're never going to catch up.
No, you can't, because the men will keep getting better and better, because that's just the nature. And the women will keep getting better and better, but maybe the women are at a level of the NHL in the 1910s, where the NHL is where the NHL is now. You're a century behind. You're never going to catch up.
Well, the NHL didn't exist, and national hockey didn't allow forward pass back then. So I think that we're a little bit further on, but your point's taken.
Skill levels.
I always look at
and you're never gonna. Then we have where you have, with all due respect to softball, that's not baseball. It's not the same sport. You have women playing that probably would like to play baseball, but they're playing Davis. They're playing with this bigger ball on this field that the diamond is half the size and is 200 to dead center.
And the ball's coming at you faster because the mound's a lot closer. So you really
not a
have
mound.
less time to react.
It's not a mound either.
Well, you know what I mean.
You have these players who would like to play baseball proper.
Monet Davis.
Yeah.
Monet Davis almost carried her Little League team to the Little League World Series. And she had to settle for a softball scholarship, and maybe that's what she wanted, but you know. And like the example I always give is when you look at world football, on the women's side, you're probably about 30 years behind the men's game. So if you took a Rose Lavelle or you took Tobin Heath and you dropped them into the English top flight in the 1980s, they could hold their own. And there's even players today where I think about Lucy Bronze, who plays for England. I think about Wendy Renard, who plays for the French national team. I think that they could play at like a second division level and be a squad player. They're not going to be stars. They're not going to be playing on the best teams in the world because there's so many men's football players, and of course not. But like they can play with them, and they would be in the mix there. But they're not going to be a star. And I think from a men's perspective, from that sports perspective, you don't want to let a woman into the picture if they're not going to be an impact, which I think is a dumb way of thinking, but I think that is the general line of thinking. So
Oh, there's
with
no
kicking
sense
in the
of
NFL, it's different.
there's no sense in bringing in a player who is good but isn't good enough to hang at your level. That's the thing.
Well, but there are players who could hang at the level, but they're never gonna like a good example, like a Sam Mewis. Sam Mewis could probably play for like I don't know Bournemouth. She could probably be fine as a backup center midfielder for Bournemouth in the championship. She's never going to play for a Liverpool or a Man City, but guess what? 99.9% of men's professional footballers aren't going to play for a Man City or a Liverpool. So, of course not. But I Sam Lewis would probably hold her own at that level. But that's not going to move the needle enough for somebody to take a chance. And that therein lies the issue. Because it's a bit of a risk.
I just, you talk about that perfect world where it would just be the best players in any sport playing against each other, and ideally it would be a mix, but we're not there. This is not co-ed rec situation we're talking about, because we're talking about high skill level professional athletes, or even at the college level, So what is a best case scenario going forward? Because obviously, we have separate sports for men's and women's when it comes to pretty much everything. You have basketball, hockey, even though I guess it's two different things there, but in terms of popularity of women's basketball versus women's hockey at least at the league level in this country. But there are equivalents for everything, really, with the exception of gridiron football, since you insist on referring to soccer as football. But with the exception of that sport, there's not a level or any sort of meaningful way. Once you graduate from like Pop Warner, I think, once you're like 8-9 years old, if you're a girl, you want to play football, your options are slim. At any kind of like meaningful level. Like I think to go back to the lingerie football league example, one of the players was a multi-sport athlete. She passed away recently. Her name was Jacinda Barkley. She was also an Australian rules footballer. She also played baseball for Australia on the international level. So these athletes were not even dedicated to American football because they couldn't be. Not just that it wouldn't pay their bills, but if you wanted to play and develop your athletic abilities, it just wasn't going to happen with football. So it might be just too late for this sport, given it's probably going to be on the decline in a couple of years, just realistically looking at all the issues you have with long-term brain damage. That it seems hard to imagine that it'll be expanding in terms of popularity. It's probably at its peak and can only go down from here, but we've been saying that for a while now. So where do we go from here in terms of women in football?
I don't know. It's 1 a.m. on a Sunday. What do you want from me? I don't know. If you want to stay specifically with the kickers, if you can kick, you can kick. Trust me, I'm a Bucks fan. If you can kick, I don't give a shit. Just kick consistently. That's all that should matter. I know it's more complicated than that, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Because old white men rule the world. And
Or
that's
there's that one song by Kesha called Dinosaur. Unfortunately, I can't play it for you because I don't have any copyright protection like I used to back, thanks to friends with WUSF. You don't want to hear some Kesha? That's unfortunate. But I guess to kind of wrap this all up is it's great, but I think, or the Sarah Fuller moment is great. I think we'll hopefully see something more this upcoming weekend. But I think, look at a big picture. What's the next step? How do we make sure this is not just an isolated incident that it's not a PR stunt. I don't think it's a PR stunt by Vanderbilt, but they were in a bind. There's no way to say it otherwise. They were in a bind. How do you make sure that next time it happens, because that's what was meant to happen, and number two, it doesn't happen 15 years from now? And I think that's the question that probably will be answered if she gets a chance to kick a field goal next week.
fingers crossed. Hopefully the coach isn't a coward this time.
Again, I'm not going to go back to that, but again, I think it's the smart move. Once you have 36 hours to reflect on this show, I think you'll agree with me, or you won't. But then that means you're just wrong. I think we're in a good place here. I mean, we didn't get a chance to talk about the fucking collapse of the NFL, but
that's next on my list after we get rid of college football. I'm coming for the NFL after that.
Just get rid of the sport completely. So we just talked about how great it was to see a woman play in a Power 5 college football game. But then Kevin's going to come up here and say, well, fuck college football. And you know what? Fuck the NFL. Just fuck the entire sport is basically what he's saying.
I agree.
Let's talk about things that in America that Kevin hates.
We don't have that kind of time.
Everything. No, I just said everything. Everything.
The government, electoral system, capitalism. You want to keep going?
I love the people that say, I'm a capitalist. No, you're just someone who just likes buying stuff from stores.
And you're not in a poverty cycle, so it doesn't affect you.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with that, but it's just, I just feel like people don't understand what it means to literally be a capitalist. You can live in a capitalistic society, but unless you're in that 1%, banking and making that money, you're not the capitalist. If you're doing okay, good for you. But you're literally not the capitalist in the situation. So, but I think this goes back to the whole getting an education sort of thing. Take a fucking civics class and listen in that civics class. I should have taken more. I should have taken more in undergrad. I regret not doing poli-sci as a double major, but we all have our regrets. Maybe I'll get a second bachelor's. But that's a story for another day. This was fun. But yeah, fuck the NFL. I mean, I do want to touch on it very briefly. I know you messaged me saying your brain's at its limit. So fuck you, Twitter.
It's 1 a.m., man.
It's 1 a.m. it's now a Monday morning. But hey, remember back in the day, the show used to be 3 hours, but it wasn't this late at night, but we'll find better times to do. This was literally impromptu. I was I DM'd you and I said, you want to do this shit? And here we are. We did it. We started doing it 20 minutes later with no show prep. So if this all seems sort of disorganized, first of all, that's what hack radio is. The last hack radio that ever aired on Bulls Radio was a 3-hour show. We did it wire to wire. I did no show prep. So there was no doc that day at all. It was just like straight through. And it was not
And then
bad.
you learned to never do that again, and hopefully that'll be the same
But
with this show.
It was meant to be the last show ever. It was meant to be the last show ever. So I was just like, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But to get back to this final point I wanted to make, I stopped watching Major League Baseball after the way they handled both the Cardinals and the Marlins outbreak, where they shut those two teams down, but they didn't shut anybody else down. They should have shut the league down and reassessed how they were doing things. And they didn't do that. And I thought that was wildly irresponsible. That doesn't mean I didn't think that they should complete their season. That just means I think that they needed to take a few days and just stop and say, okay, how can we prevent this from happening a third time, where a third team doesn't have to miss 3 weeks of baseball or however long the Cardinals were out. Fortunately, I don't think it got to that point ever again. There were games missed from there on out, but it was never as bad. But when they didn't shut the rest of the league down after, because that happened after the opening weekend. So once a couple of days passed from there, I'm like, all right, this isn't going to happen. I was like, I can't in good faith watch this.
But Brian, you don't understand. They made it all the way to the playoffs without a positive test. Clean as a whistle.
Yeah, I bet. And the same reasons why I'm not watching college football this year. I caught like the last couple of minutes of the Vandy game, and I will make an effort to watch the entire Vandy game this weekend. But other than that, I have no intention of watching college football, other than to watch Sarah Fuller at this point. But that's, I guess it's not the same reason, but it's more along the lines of they're not even being paid, these players. So there are COVID considerations why I'm not watching that sport, why I'm not watching the other sport. But so far, so good for the NFL, or so it seemed. And then it's really started to spiral out of control here. And now all of a sudden you have the Ravens 8 straight days of positive case, of at least one positive case. The Broncos suited up a wide receiver from their practice squad under center today. He went 2 of
1.
1 of
9.
1
of
of
9,
9.
2 picks.
Okay, I know there was 2 somewhere there. I knew there was a 2 there, and he was 0 for in the first half, and I'm sure he didn't get half the hate that Sarah Fuller got, even though he's played the position before of quarterback. Not recently, but he's played quarterback before in high school. So it's really started to spiral. So I was at the point this Sunday here, I didn't turn the TV on, and I don't know if I'm going to watch football for the rest of the year, because you need to when you get to the situation here, and the NFL's even accounted for a Week 18. Major League Baseball wasn't accounting for anything other than, well, the World Series Game 7 will happen by this date. And damn it, they found a way to power through, which was a bad idea. But the NFL has contingency plans in place where Week 18, or if they have to cancel a meaningful number of games, they'll have extra teams in the playoffs. They have plans in place. And there's no way you could play an NFL season in any sort of bubble. It's just not possible. The fields would get chewed up to hell. You couldn't do it. You couldn't do it with the broadcast windows you have. In this case, money should matter because it's professional sports and the players are getting compensated pretty nicely. So it's different than college football. So I'm in this situation where I don't know if I can watch any more NFL after this, because yes, they have these plans in place, but that doesn't matter if you're not actually utilizing them. Why do you keep pushing Ravens and Steelers back? Move that to this Week 18 that you're talking about. Like, I'd like to see that game, but I don't want to see it without Lamar Jackson. I don't get this.
I would especially like to see it with Lamar Jackson because I had to play Derek Carr at QB on my fantasy team,
Nobody
and
cares about your fantasy
he
team.
put up a goose egg.
Well, he probably put up more kids than Derek Carr has a lot of kids. Jim.
No, that's Phillip Rivers.
Oh, I thought Derek Carr had some kids too.
I mean,
I would love
maybe.
to see. I would love to see a Derek Carr versus Phillip Rivers baby football game.
Dude, he's got 2 kids. What are you talking about?
How old is he?
29.
It's 2 more than I had at 29.
Well, move on.
I mean, there's nothing to move on from. I mean, that's a way to just like crash the car into the wall. You want to talk about crashing the car into the wall? So this is just to be silly at the end of the show, but this is something I was thinking about last night. You know, this is the way we're going to have to do our songs these days. You know, Icona Pop, right? Remember that Swedish band Icona Pop from early last decade? They had some songs, I Don't Care, All Night, and there was another one that wasn't that popular, but it's a fucking jam. We Got the World.
No, but for the sake of the show, I'll say yes.
Because I crashed my car into the bridge. I don't care. Big in like 2013, I want to say.
Nope.
Okay. Well, Kids Bop does freaking covers of every freaking song in the world. But you know, they'll change lyrics that are inappropriate for kids, which leads to some funny things. And then there are some just songs that they shouldn't be doing because they like, how do you do a song? I don't know if they've done it, but how would you ever do how is it said? WAP or WAP?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. But you know that like those Kids Bop writers are itching to find a way to do a cover of that song. I'm sure. Well, they did a cover, of course, of Icona Pop, I Don't Care. And like I said, there's that line, I crashed my car into the bridge. I don't care. I love it. I don't care. Nothing. At this point,
Nope.
I think at this point, like that's so much copyrighted, and I sing the in tune. We're fucked anyway. So, Kids Bop changed that line to I drove my car into the bridge. I don't care. What the fuck does that mean? What does that mean? First of all, why is I drove my car into the bridge bad for kids to hear? Second of all, if you're going to change that, how can you change it to something that makes absolutely no sense? You've compromised that song to the point it makes no sense anymore. So I have some questions for the Kids Bop writers. And obviously this album that they released was like 20 of their albums ago and 7 years ago in real time. But every time I hear that Icona Pop song and it gets that line, I think about that Kids Bop song because it was just that's one of the most absurd Kids Bop moments of all time. And that says something because they've done like 75 albums over the span of like 20 years. And I just don't understand who's listening to Kids Bop, first of all? Like, outside of Radio Disney, where's the market for Kids Bop songs? Second of all, just God help me. Just God help me for just going down this rabbit hole because I always have questions about Kids Bop. And I blame my my favorite YouTuber, Elise Uckland, for that. She is obsessed with Kids Bop. But the bigger story here is what is wrong with that lyric? I will never understand that.
I genuinely don't know how this got brought up or where we started. I'm so confused.
I said something about driving. You told me to move on, but I was like, I can't move on because I drove my car into the side of the bridge. But then I thought,
Nope, that can't be it.
that Kids Bop line, that Kids Bop line. I drove my car into the bridge. All right, what did you do then? God, I understand you want to keep like violent imagery out of kids' head, but like I think they can handle a car crash.
Anyways, Nolan Brown is our editor. Our producer is Jason Schwartz. Our sound engineer is Jessica Rathburn. Thanks for joining us, ladies and gentlemen.
Who are these names you're listing off? We really should get a third person in on this, just so they can.
I think we should burn this tape and never release it.
Oh, the only thing that's getting released, number one, is your intro about Robin Williams, and number two is this last critical part about Iconopop and Kids Bop.
I can live with that.
You can live with that because instead of crashing your car into the bridge, you drove your car into the bridge because you are a Kids Bop kid. I don't care. I love it.
No.
All right. Thanks for joining us. If you made it through this entire episode, what the hell is wrong with you? We will do this again sometime soon. I'd like to make this at least a weekly thing, but we'll figure it out. I don't think it's going to be an August to November sort of thing, though. I think we'll do it more frequently than that. But for now, I'm Brian Atab. That's Kevin Erlinson. There was no producer here. If there was a producer, this shit would have stopped a long time ago.
I made all of those names up.
Who the fuck? What kind of name is Nolan Brown anyway?
Yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you sometime later. Goodbye.